The toe, the selection pressure for toe is for climbing. If you don't climb, you don't need the divergent big toe. The selection pressure for the arch is for lightweight speed, endurance, running, and walking. If you don't have that body form, if you're a big, heavy, or extremely muscular, you don't have the physiology for endurance running, an arch isn't going to be any benefit to you. Going up steep mountainsides is facilitated by having a flat, flexible foot, greater range of motion in those joints, as I'm sure you can attest. Okay, some other quick, we're doing just kind of a potpourri. What about the Yeti, since we're in Asia? What's the state of affairs there? Well, I had a student help me go through all of the published and unpublished photos, photo documentation of Yeti tracks that we could identify and lay our hands on. And the vast majority of them were bare. Unmistakably, irrefutably bare. Then there were some that were just absolutely unintelligible. They had suffered from sublimation and melting and refreezing to the point that you couldn't tell what they were. And then there were some, these two in particular. This is the facsimile created by Chernetsky, of the Eric Shipton footprint. And this is a cast from the McNeely-Cronin expedition to the Aran Valley many years later. When we look at these two, now unfortunately, if you notice, there's something here that's odd. I've never seen a foot that has a flange, has a feature like this that would be translated into a footprint. If you go back and look at the original photograph, you'll notice, and if you look at the whole picture, that shows the edge of the ice that's melted and kind of fluted and has refrozen, you'll see that there are places where it's melted and refrozen. And this is one of those. So the footprint has stepped in the little crystalline snow that's over the top of the ice. It's stepped in that snow and it has overlapped with one of these melt out points. So the real outline of the foot, you know, the deepest point here being right underneath the calcaneal tuberosity, if this is real, is right here. This is the outline of the foot. Which is interesting because then it turns that whole thing to the side. It brings that big toe back a little bit so that it's an actual divergent big toe, and the outline would look something like this. And so here they are to scale, the McNeely-Cronin and then the Shipton. So this suggested to me that the only reasonable, credible footprint evidence for the Yeti suggested an ape that had a more primitive foot with a divergent big toe. We won't go into, in the case of the Shipton, there may be some other pathology going on here. We can talk about another time. Well, then comes along Josh Gates from Destination Truth, and they had taken an expedition to Bhutan, to Nepal, to look for the Yeti. They took a spontaneous little outing one night, totally unplanned, according to him, up this canyon where there had been sightings recently. And suddenly they heard a splash, and in the creek just below them, something went crashing through the brush. They went and investigated and found this. So there was this footprint, so it was in the dark, they had the spotlight on it and had their cameraman. And it had crossed the creek, and it was a very, very rocky, narrow little creek, and big boulders strewn in vegetation, brush. And then there was this little sort of oxbow, not quite an oxbow, but a bend with a shoal of sediment that went from silty sand up to gravel. And there was this one very clear footprint, and then there was a heel imprint next of the opposite foot, and then there was a track further up here. It's this way. This one right here. They tried to cast it, but it was, the situation I described where you have a shallow imprint in gravel. The placer just went down in between the gravel and it was unintelligible. It just came out as a glob of gravel. So they brought them both to the lab. We cleaned them up a bit, and then we did a three-dimensional scan. So we had this modeled and rendered in 3D, and I was really grateful that he had thought to make the cast of the heel imprint. So we rendered that as well, and then we reversed it in the computer and superimposed it on the other track, and except for the greater depth of impression, the asymmetries of the outline of the heel were mirror images. They were identical, and the fit was perfect. That really suggested that this was a spontaneous series of footprints to me. The toes obviously didn't show a divergent big toe, but they showed a tremendous amount of splay and a high degree of abduction of that big toe. And when people first look at that, it doesn't look like your typical Sasquatch track. But here's an example from the Blue Mountains. It was cast by a gentleman named Kevin Lindley, who got interested after some of the notoriety by Paul Freeman and so forth, and about Paul Freeman. He went off into the woods all by himself, areas way off of the roads. Paul never left the roads because he had weight problems and bad feet due to diabetes, which eventually lost one of his legs before he passed away. So he was not very capable of hiking very far from the truck. So no possibility of his involvement in laying down artificial tracks miles from the road. Here's another one that actually bears even more striking resemblance with a great degree of divergence of the big toe. So both of these are come from the Blues under fairly reasonable and I think credible circumstances. Okay, here's some others now. Well, also, my point being then, this is a little bit odd. I was very comfortable in having the Yeti being a very distinct species, and maybe it still is. Maybe there is a species that has a divergent big toe, a large, essentially terrestrial ape. It's only seen once in a while when it moves from valley to valley in that particular region. And then there's also a Bigfoot type, one that is probably of larger stature and bulk and has a more humanoid-shaped foot, at least in the sense that it has a non-divergent big toe and probably more committed to terrestrial locomotion. Then here in Bhutan, in the Ministry of Forestry, George Schaller sent me this photograph, and there's a series of Yeti footprints on display. Here they are kind of cleaned up as they appear in my book. 4 toes, very narrow heel, rather strange anatomy. I mean, if they bear any resemblance to anything, it would be, in my mind, more bear-like than anything, with just a lack of the additional digits showing up in the footprints. Or, as has been suggested, it may be the result of very enthusiastic foresters trying to please their superiors with the discovery of, as motivated by a request from the king of Bhutan to provide evidence of the Yeti, so doing that. So we never know. Some of the aspects of the heels look very artificial. They look in some ways kind of scraped out. If you look carefully at the striations, the longitudinal striations here, so on. But we do have these reports of several different types. There's the Mete, the Yete, and the Zute, the Mete and the Telma, and how those relate, and whether some of them are bears. This one looks suspiciously like a bear. This one has claws on its hands. You know, it just has a more quadrupedal appearance as they appear in these traditional renditions. If you've read Reinhold Messner's book, it's kind of a book that kind of goes all over the place, but it's worth reading because it provides a very interesting perspective of the potential for confusion between the idea of a bear and a Yeti or Mete or Zute. The Zute, according to Sanderson, was the large Sasquatch type. But today it's pretty well accepted that the Zute refers to the Asiatic brown bear in that region. So, you know, are we dealing with a hominid or hominoid, or are we dealing with the bear over there? Certainly there's confusion. Well, the question is there confusion? Are the two being blended? Are the Sherpas simply saying Yeti, Yeti to anything that leaves a footprint because they think that's what their guide wants? A classic case was Frank Smith, who came upon very clear footprints that he photographed extensively. He was very skilled photographer, and the Sherpas were adamant that these were Yeti tracks. He sent them back to London, and they said, well, they look like bear to me. And I tracked down his heir, his son, I think his son or grandson, who still has the original photos, and he sent me proofs, and they're bear. And there's absolutely no question that they're bear. So what are the Sherpas thinking? Do they not know the difference, or is there no difference in their mind? Or are they simply trying to please, so what do we have? Is is there really an ape-like creature behind these reports or not? Now, here's one last case in point. This came to my attention here recently, a photo that appeared on the web of a tsute or migoi mask in a bazaar, on sale in a bazaar in Kathmandu. And the webpage belonged to a professional photographer, very accomplished photographer, beautiful photographs from all over the world. So I looked her up, got her contact information, wrote to her, and I said, I'm very interested, introduced myself, I said, very interested in this. I said, what's the background? Did the merchant have any story about this? Or is it just, just something for the tourists? And she said, yeah, it's just something for the tourists. This is just, they just make these because they know that the Europeans will buy them up. And so, is that the case? Well, we don't know. What's behind it? But the point is there has to be a grain of conservatism as we approach these pieces of evidence, and the status of hominology, a la Dmitry Leonov, is in a rather tangled state in Asia. It's going to take a lot of work to kind of unravel it and sort through the various lines of data. So thank you very much.